Does anyone have a question? Question. Hi, Steve. When meditating, I experience a switching between two states. One, bright and alert, energetic, and in contact. The other, a kind of sinking, lost in thought. I don't understand how I am. I don't understand how I am, and that sulk state came together. The energy of being gets so lost in it. Could you offer some words on this? You just get lost to the association of condition. That's all. Consciousness, although lives the condition, when realized it doesn't associate itself with the condition. Consciousness always comes first. So you cannot be lost. You just presume to be lost because you presume the condition, the thinking of the condition. Don't do that. condition of reality is never lost. But whereby you've presumed the condition and lived in association to the condition that arises, the tendency is then to think it. And that's quite an error, quite an illusion, really. The true condition of reality, the knowing itself, is the self. For which the condition that arises as feeling lost or a sense of sunkenness is simply happening. Do not presume that it experiences itself. Then you'll come to see that that condition is okay. That the true condition that is seeing is never lost. Consciousness always comes first. When realized, it does not associate itself to the activity of the body. It's not a thinker of the body. It doesn't presume that there's something other. Consciousness, although the true condition of reality is prior all condition that arises. What arises, the experience of that is consciousness, not the thing itself. But as soon as the thing itself arises in consciousness, you assume its narrative. You assume association. The feeling of lost or sunkenness is simply happening. And it does not happen to itself separately from what is seeing. And what is seeing is what comes first, is what is never lost. So when you're meditating or remaining in your knowing, your personal content will just come into its own association with itself, and it won't match self when awakened or when remaining as what you know. That false association with its desire or pull to personal experience will come into true association by what is really experiencing. You come to see that you are not the body. You are the knowing of it. The body does not experience itself, but it appears within your knowing. A body that assumes itself comes back to the self, comes back to gnosis. What appears lost then is found. There is only the first and what arises out of the first. One is prior condition, and one is the condition to live. What lives is consciousness. Be okay with it. Live it without associating to it the meaning of what you are as consciousness. The part of you that is lost will be found. And what is found comes in true relationship to what is truly living, not what is assuming. Consciousness never associates itself with the body. Given the illusion that the mind thinks itself. When the mind thinks itself, it resumes its acquired knowledge and seeks for something other, and sees everyone as other and everything as other. This is a mistake. Stay in what is first. The knowing of what is arising. Comes first. When remaining as what is first, you have no like or dislike for any content. Remaining as the first, you just see any content with a presumed narrative happens within what is first, and what is first it is itself that lives. Being okay with it. Is seeing it, nothing else. Not for anyone, not for you. Everything is self-evident. Everything that arises or whatever content appears, it is self-evident of the witness of consciousness. Evident of consciousness being what lives. when the content of your person begins to undo, begins to appear. By remaining what you are, allows the content, true relationship. It associates to what is seeing rather than what is seeing associating to content. This is the shift. Question. Hi Steve, I feel like I'm being undone in who I am, how I move in the world. It's strange how it's happening when I don't even know it's happening. It's as if God's family in the driving seat. But the I still functions as if it has some agency, some directiveness in the world. Is this a stage, or is this just how it is and will continue to be? But body consciousness is an ego state in itself, that what is first as consciousness doesn't associate with as a meaning. Consciousness always remains the meaning. So even body consciousness is happening within consciousness, but consciousness is what is living that. So what happens upon awakening when you start to really understand from what you are? You go through some stages. One stage is really learning to live you without being you, so to speak. It sounds bizarre, but when consciousness awakens, there is no other experience. And what is happening within that, consciousness doesn't separate from itself to associate with that, to define itself. It just doesn't do that. Okay. When you then start to live as that, you come to see that although there's body consciousness or body ego, ego meaning reality principle, not that ego that we speak of, that's personal doership. I'm talking about reality principle. Reality, you know, what I call self-consciousness, the sense of here. Okay, because what comes first is not here. It's not here at all. You can't locate it here. It doesn't associate itself to here to define itself. It doesn't attach to here to try and find itself. You see. So when that awakens, you are kind of just living, really, just observing, and that observation then becomes synonymous with experience. Okay. And that's a beautiful thing, because it's a paradox. It's not a mental understanding or way, even emotional way. It's got nothing to do with that. It's just you come to see that the body, what comes first is the knowing of it, and the body's happening within it. And that's a seeing. It's a seeing that what is not here is the experience of here. You see, as what you see, you experience as well. Okay. And it's amazing. But then what happens is you come to see that the body is just the modification that it doesn't experience itself, because as I've said, the experience is the seeing, is consciousness. It's not here. So even in all that lifetime of presuming that the body does think itself, in that modification that doesn't experience itself, the modification sets itself to that, creates a habit where the dynamic plays out. So what can happen is these modifications in their patterning, the patterned modification, mental, emotional, whatever responses you've had to things in the past, kind of don't match you anymore. A lot of them don't match you. They don't match because these patterns live in association to think itself or to exist by itself. But you know this is erroneous, because as this knowing, you won't separate from it for anything, not for any pattern. Okay, not for any pattern. When something pulls you to separate, to experience, to possess the body, you just see it. And it's just a modification, it's just an old habit. And the point I'm saying here is because the modification itself doesn't awaken. never ever awakens. For instance, the body doesn't awaken, the mind doesn't awaken. Do you understand? All is consciousness. All experience is consciousness right now. If you look for the experience of your body, if you look for the experience of your mind, you know, it's not a presumed experience. There's no one experiencing it. There's just what you are. Okay. So when that awakens, you're left with kind of what you've done in your modification in your life, in your body, what you've done with it, you know. But one thing that does fall away completely in the beginning is the identity. Okay, the identity falls away. Identifying with the body falls away. And of course, identifying with the body is a huge tension. It needs a lot of energy to identify with the body. You've really got to contract into an attachment and to create a thinking mind. A mind that thinks itself is a lot of energy, a lot of energy. Okay, and that can fall away. Okay, the fundamental belief of assumed knowledge defining an idea of a personal leadership can fall away, and in some cases it can happen quickly and be quite scary, because you're going beyond all location, and that tension that it takes to be a mind that thinks itself, emotions that presume personal reality. There's a lot of tension in that, a lot of tension, a lot of energy, really, can't tell you. Okay, that can fall away. This is what we call awakening or self-realization. That can fall away, and then in some accounts it can be quite scary, or in some accounts it can be quite, wow, you know. For me, it was quite frightening. But when identity falls away, do you see what I'm saying here? When identity falls away, it's the assumed thought, thinking, the mind, which takes a lot of energy. The emotional identity that maintains personal reality, there's even more energy in that, you see. So when that falls away, suddenly there can be an absolute waking up to what's truly experiencing this. Okay, it can become very sudden, and you're, the only way you can describe it is like your wide open reality. It's just reality that doesn't associate with the body. Hence, it doesn't attach with the body. Hence, it doesn't contract in a way that the mind thinks itself. Okay, so all of that goes. Okay, so what you're left with is this true intuition, basically. You know, this you're left with self-realization. You're left with what is seeing doesn't associate with this, so it doesn't attach. It's just knowing of itself, for itself, unto itself, and in that knowing, there's no location, nothing. It's just pure intelligence, pure aliveness. And it sees that it is first, and it is the experience, and nothing else. Via any other agency, you can't experience that. You can't. You are the experience of that. You are the appearance of that as well. But it is modification, and modification isn't a second intelligence. It's not something that has to be worked out in that sense. It's not a separate intelligence. It is consciousness set in that form. Okay, but prior awakening, where it was set in that form, you just believed it, that you presumed it as something other, you know, you went seeking. So now that awakening occurs, and then gnosis becomes not just the seeing, but the experience, the identity can fall away, and that's a ton of energy. That's so, I mean, this is why when awakening occurs, it can be quite an experience, because it's a lot of energy undoing, and it can feel, this is why they, in spiritual literature such as the Gospels, they talk about dying to self, because it does feel like that tension, when it dissipates, of course it disappears. It disappears, and in the absence of that tension is this first, okay, and there's no tension in that whatsoever. And this is why they call it bliss. It's not bliss that you can find in the body, it's bliss that already is. And bliss is where it's been used. It's been very, very misunderstood by a lot of people. But bliss itself is just this. It's aliveness. It's happening right now. It's a different energy to the attachment energy that uses the psychic resource of personal self. The natural self or natural state is a deeper resource that is just completely alive. And this is why in India, you know, when they talk about transmission, because when you relate from that, your very awareness conveys the very essence of itself, which is not psychic in any way. It comes into the psyche, you see, as the building block that creates a thought for something, you know. So anyway, coming back to your question, what do we do when your forms don't match you? You've set these forms in ways, habits, even character. Character is a habit, isn't it? The habit of you know, smiling, or when you see a dog, you pat it. That's one of my habits. It's a terrible habit. Because there's a lot of dogs in Hastings. They're all so cute. So we have habits, character and stuff like that. But even consciousness as the first, that doesn't associate to that to be you. Do you see what I mean? Whereas before, that's what you did. You assumed character in a way to experience yourself. But when this awakens, when consciousness becomes the first, you just don't do that. You know, and this is why they call awakened consciousness divine indifference. Have you heard of that before? Divine indifference. It's divine, but it's not associated to the form, so it's indifferent to form. It's not cruel or unkind. It's completely alive. It's completely unconditional. It's wonderful. Okay. So I'm getting closer to your question, answering your question now, going around the houses, but this is interesting. Interesting. So the big tension of identity can fall away, but the mark of that identity, what we call the stain, still remains in the construct of the forms, the patterning. Okay, so where you have a habit of a lifetime assuming your patterns, that assumption is still going to be in there as a stain. Okay, and this applies to the first question we had. You know, when meditating, the two states, that state came up of feeling a bit lost, or there was a sinking thing, if I remember correctly. And there was a stain in that. There was a stain in that condition that was arising within the divine indifference. And can you see how there's still an assumed pull to pull you in, to think, suddenly you're assuming it and thinking, you know, what is that? What do I do? Or whatever. Nothing. That's just a stain. Totally be okay with all of that, and just Just don't associate to it. Don't get caught up in its association to think itself or to worry about itself or have concern in that sense. So anyway, so you can go through life in the beginning of awakening, and it's very liberating at first, incredibly liberating. But then, because that identity thing has fallen away, but then what happens is the self starts to format again as you maybe go back to work or have more to do with your family, friends, daily activities. Suddenly, all your old patterns are coming in because it's your download. How would you make a cup of tea or hoover the carpet if you didn't have patterns? You need patterns, see. And what you'll find is that there's still the old stain in there, but it's only a stain. It's not ego. It's stain. And this was important because when I woke up and I was, don't forget, I was in a fellowship as well. I was 3.5 years sober and surrounded by people working a program and talking spirituality and stuff like that. But after the awakening, profoundly changed my view on how I saw the ego. Okay, how I saw the ego. When I saw the ego for what it was, when it fell away, I clearly saw that the tendency to separate into getting caught up in the self again, I could see it wasn't ego. I saw the difference. I saw it's just a stain, a tendency, a habit. And I saw that by remaining what I know, the tendency would fall away. And as it fell away or cleaned, because even a tendency it's kind of like a trigger for tension. It creates, whereas the old ego was built completely on tension, because there's a lot of tension to think yourself. The stain creates a tension as well. It's like an inbuilt mechanism where you get the pattern, the trigger, and then tension, pay attention and come into the mind to think itself. That's fine. It's fine. See it. Just see it. And when that tension starts to dissipate, the pattern then starts to come in true relationship to consciousness being the experience. It takes a little time. It takes a little time. So you've got ego and you've got stain of ego. Stain of ego. I mean, even Christ said, spoke about the cleaning of the inside of the cup. We don't just clean the outside of the cup, clean it of attachment, clean the inside of it as well. And the inside is the stain. Yeah. And there's another thing as well that you need to know is that's just the patterning, okay? But just remain to what you know, and then also you then learn. You just see it, that the here, the sense of here, personal consciousness, because there is a personal sense of being here. If you didn't have that, you'd have no spatial ability. So if a tiger was running at you, you wouldn't know how far away it was or how big it was, how long its teeth are. You just wouldn't have that. So you've got this spatial ability, and that spatial ability of here is a natural occurrence. It's what's happening within consciousness. Okay, so that's and it's kind of like a self-awareness linked to our senses, and that's normal. That's just being here. But what's not here is experiencing here. So our sense of here-ness, don't try and get rid of that. That's very much an ego tendency. When awakening occurs, you come to see that the here isn't here either, that it has no inherent existence separate from what is not here. It's a very simple truth that can be experienced directly when surrendered, when just seeing. So there's always a personal sense of you, a personal sense, a personal modification. But even your knowing doesn't associate with that to define itself. Okay, because in the old days, in the ego world, you would associate with the personal and develop a self-image in its likeness, and you'd be trying to modify living, defining yourself by how you appear. But that's not the case with knowing. Knowing doesn't have that association with your personal sense of self. Your personal sense of self is a mirror of what is seen of your original face. Despite what that personal effect looks like, it is self-evident. It doesn't exist outside of what is existing, what is seen. It's all knowing, it's all consciousness. And when you remain as awareness or as knowing, you come to see that if there is an egoic tendency left in a pattern to do, to think it, to base reality on what you feel, which is completely egoic, completely. Don't base reality on whatever you feel, what you think, ever. Don't do that. You just come to see that anything that pulls you to separate is just tension. Ego is tension. It's all tension. But where we personalize that tension into a doership, it feels real, doesn't it? It feels like it's you. But it's not. It's just tension. That's when I died to self in 1999. The Steve that fell away, that I felt I was dying and then entering into non-existence, it turned out to be tension. It's just that I personalized it. And that's what we do. That's what people do. They personalize their tension and call it I. Call it us, call it me, you know. So just be okay with it. Be okay with that stain or whatever. It needs to be seen. It needs to be corrected, but it can only be corrected by knowing what is experiencing, what is true. If something tries to separate you from that being the experience, then don't separate. And that tension will not be fed, and it will enter its own dissolution, a continual dissolution. Just integration. It's simple integration, very simple. Let yourself be dysfunctional, let yourself hang out and be whatever it is. Just remain what you know. It doesn't matter. Don't try and make yourself on the outside look like what you are as a direct experience. That's another illusion. Don't do that. Just be real. Meaning, just in that knowing, don't associate with anything to define that. You know it will always lead you in the right way. knowing is pure knowledge. Consciousness is pure knowledge. Can you please speak about synchronicity and what is real time? Thank you. It's all synchronicity. Synchronicity is real time. Time is not linear. It's just where we identify with the mind, we create our own time. When the consciousness awakens to the experience, there's no boundary. It's not associated to these five senses for its limited application of information or finding. You come away from that, consciousness expands, remains experience, and then it enters into synchronicity. That's it. Don't try and understand it though. Know it. Just if you remain in what you know, things open up. Things happen that, you know, far exceed the limitation of personal doership. Things happen that just don't make sense, or different other type of portals open up for communication, or space and time aren't relevant when it comes to communication and connecting. Does anyone have a question? So always stay in the first, but don't personalize anything. That doesn't mean that you don't have a personal, but personalization is the error. Personal is, you know, and kind of where the ego does personalize um, in its attachment for the mind to think itself, then there's a personalized subject, I thought, you know, that judges and works it whatever. So it gives the personal a bad name, you know. So when personalization falls away, doesn't mean you become dissociated, it just means you actually come away from dissociation. You're actually directly experiencing from the first. You are rooted in, you are the root itself, not rooted, but you are the root itself of all appearance. So no need to personalize anymore, rather just directly experience, which is completely the opposite of personalization. One remains non-personal in the root, as the root. And then in this direct experience of a body that's appearing within it, there is a personal, but it's even the personal is self-evident of what is not here, what's non-personal. See, there's a huge paradox when you start to live by what you know. And having a sense of personal isn't personalization, isn't the ego. Interesting, important distinction to make. Don't personalize anything. Be personal, but be first personal, and allow personal to be happening within it. Personalization is dangerous. In terms of dynamics, the way people judge, the way people fight, argue, and stuff like that. Yeah, wars. That's what I mean, war and destruction. Personalization is a misuse of power. Yeah.